When I arrived at my new home as a bride, everything felt like a scene from a distant dream. The garlands, the soft murmur of congratulations, the scent of henna still clinging to my hands, it was all supposed to be magical. My mother-in-law welcomed me with warmth, guiding me through the house with proud eyes. My husband, Akram, stayed close, his grip reassuring. Everything seemed perfect. Until I noticed him, Ijaz. I'd been told he was Akram's younger brother, but I later discovered he was actually 2 years older than me. Unmarried, quiet, observant, living under the same roof. At first glance, he seemed polite, but it was his eyes that betrayed him. From the very first moment, his gaze felt invasive, lingering, studying. Not with curiosity, but with something darker, something that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just nervous, unfamiliar with a new place and new people. But my unease only grew stronger. The morning after the wedding, I stepped out of my room for the first time, wrapped in my bridal red, my heart pounding. I had rehearsed every step in my mind, how to walk, how to smile, how to greet everyone with grace. But none of that prepared me for what I saw. He was standing right outside my door, waiting. His eyes scanned me slowly, and a smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. I tried to ignore him and walk past, but he leaned in, invading my personal space, and whispered something into my ear. Something vile. Something I cannot repeat. My body went cold. I froze where I stood, heart thudding so hard I thought it might burst. My eyes widened in disbelief. I turned to him, shocked and trembling. He smiled casually like nothing was wrong and said, "That wasn't such a big deal. Don't take it too seriously." Then he winked, as if we shared a secret, and strolled away. I stood there, stunned. My feet refused to move. My face flushed with heat, not from shyness, but from humiliation. I pulled my scarf tighter around myself, desperate for a layer of protection, and rushed to my mother-in-law's room. She greeted me kindly, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being stripped bare by his gaze. I had only spent one night in this house, and already I felt unsafe, alone, vulnerable. I'd always heard people say that the relationship between a sister-in-law and a husband's brother was complicated, that it was a dangerous bond. I never understood what they meant. Now I did. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't just an expression. It was a warning, and I was already too close to the fire. The next few days passed in a blur of rituals, relatives, and rehearsed smiles. But beneath all the ceremonial joy, my mind remained unsettled. No one noticed the fear behind my eyes. I laughed when expected, nodded when spoken to, and fulfilled every expectation of a newlywed bride. But my thoughts were not with the people around me. They were stuck on Ejaz. He was always there, too present, too involved. At first, his behavior seemed like harmless teasing, pulling the edge of my scarf when no one was looking, brushing past me in the hallway under the guise of being in a rush. But as each day passed, the jokes became bold, the touches lingered longer, and the looks, they stripped me layer by layer until I began to feel naked in my own home. The worst part was that he did it all with a smile, a grin that no one else seemed to find suspicious. He played the charming younger brother to perfection in front of the family. He even joked with Akram, teased our mother-in-law, and helped in small chores to appear helpful. But behind that mask lived a predator. Whenever Akram left for work, Ejaz's presence transformed completely. He became bold, fearless. I tried to stay inside my room during those hours, locking the door behind me. But he always found an excuse. A light bulb that needed changing, a question about groceries, or sometimes no excuse at all. He'd knock, pretending urgency, and I'd stay frozen in place, heart pounding, hoping he'd leave. But he rarely did. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when I felt his eyes on me again. I ignored it, focusing on my task, but then he walked by and casually tugged a strand of my hair. I gasped, jerking away from him. "Why are you always so scared?" he said with a chuckle. "You should relax. You're too beautiful to frown all the time." His words made my skin crawl. I stood up, gathering the laundry in my arms, and walked away without responding. That evening, while we all sat around the dinner table, Ejaz struck again, this time more openly. "Ami, I don't understand why you chose Rubina for me," he said suddenly, pushing his plate aside. "She's dull, plain, and boring. Look at the girl you chose for Akram. Now that's what I call a wife." She has class, beauty, everything. If only I had someone like her. His eyes didn't leave mine. The words weren't just said, they were directed. I looked around the table expecting someone, anyone, to speak up. But instead, Akram burst out laughing. You're not getting someone like my wife, Ijaz. Settle for Rubina. No one scolded him, not even my mother-in-law. I sat there frozen, my stomach churning with shame and disbelief. The predator was not only unchallenged, he was entertained. And I began to wonder, was I the only one seeing the shadow growing inside this house? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Akram, his steady breathing beside me, while my own thoughts spun in silence. The words Ajazi had spoken at the dinner table played on a loop in my mind. Not just the words, but the way he said them. Unashamed, bold, staring at me as if I belonged to him. And then there was Akram's laugh. Not shock, not anger, just laughter, as if his brother had cracked an innocent joke. It broke something inside me. When Akram finally stirred, I gathered the courage to speak. I told him, quietly but clearly, that his brother's eyes made me uncomfortable, that Ajaz said things, did things that weren't right. Akram turned to me, his expression hardening instantly. Are you serious right now? He snapped. My voice trembled. Yes, I wouldn't say this if it wasn't important. You must be imagining things, he said coldly. Ijaz is a little mischievous, but he's not shameless. He always praises you, worries about you. And this is how you repay him? His words hit me like a slap. I'm not repaying anyone, I whispered. I'm just trying to tell you how unsafe I feel. Akram sat up in bed, furious now. Women like you always want attention. You want your husband to be your slave, and when you realize you're living in a house with your in-laws, suddenly you create drama. You want me to fight my brother and leave the house, don't you? No, I said quickly, tears forming. That's not what I want. He shook his head, was hiding. Then stop accusing my family. If anyone's wrong here, it's you. He left the room, slamming the door behind him. I remained there in silence, tears rolling down my face. It wasn't just that Akram didn't believe me, it was that he didn't even consider the possibility. I had come into this house thinking it was mine. I was wrong. It was theirs. And I was merely surviving in it. From that day, Ejaz changed even more. He became shameless. He started sitting near me whenever I cleaned, leaning too close, throwing compliments that carried double meanings. He stared openly, never blinking. My scarf felt like a fragile defense, and every time I bent down to sweep, I knew he was watching. One afternoon, I heard a loud noise from the kitchen and rushed in to find Ejaz bleeding from his palm. A knife had slipped and cut his hand. Panicked, I grabbed the first aid kit and began bandaging him. As I leaned in, I felt his gaze locked on my face. My hands trembled. You're so caring, he said softly. If only I had met you first. You should have been mine, not Akram's. I froze, my fingers went numb, I looked at him horrified. Think before you speak, I said, voice shaking. I'm your brother's wife. He sighed and said, That's the only tragedy. I ran from the kitchen, heart pounding. I didn't know how much longer I could take this. And worse, I didn't know who would believe me if things got worse. I locked myself in my room that evening and cried until my head throbbed. The kitchen scene haunted me, the way Ejaz had looked at me, the calm audacity in his voice, as if he had done nothing wrong. His words echoed like poison in my mind. You should have been mine. They weren't just inappropriate, they were terrifying. How had my life become this? Akram didn't return to our room that night. I heard him walk in around midnight and settle on the couch in the lounge. He didn't knock, didn't check on me. That silence hurt more than any argument. Days passed, and the fear inside me grew. I stayed in my room as much as I could, finding excuses to avoid Ejaz. But he always found a way to linger. He'd invent reasons to call me out, to ask for something only I could get. He would sit in the hallway while I mopped, eyes fixed on me like I was a performer on a stage. Sometimes he didn't even bother with words. He'd just smile. A sick, knowing smile that made me want to disappear. My mother-in-law began complaining. Why are you locking yourself up in your room so much? The household work is getting neglected. You're not the first woman to get married. What could I say? That her precious son was turning my life into a nightmare? She wouldn't believe me. No one would, not even my husband. So I began forcing myself to return to routine. Cooking, cleaning, pretending. I couldn't afford to look suspicious, but inside I was rotting. Then things got worse. One afternoon, as I swept the hallway, Ijaz dragged a chair right in front of me and sat down, watching me without shame. I clutched my dupatta tighter, keeping my head down, ignoring him. But then came the comments. Slow, suggestive, mocking. You know, you look even more beautiful when you're angry, he said softly. Your eyes become wild, like a woman who burns with passion. I turned my back to him, pretending I hadn't heard. My hands shook as I swept harder, faster. You act like you hate me, he continued, but I know you feel something too. I dropped the broom and fled, heart racing. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Akram came home, and for the second time, I told him the truth. But this time, he didn't just dismiss me. He exploded. He accused me of manipulating him, of trying to separate him from his family. He claimed I was jealous of Ijaz's closeness with him, that I wanted the house to myself. He said beautiful women like me were always dangerous, never satisfied, always looking to control. His words broke me. Then came the final blow. I may never doubt my brother, he said coldly, but I can doubt a woman like you, and if I have to choose, I'll choose my family over you every time. And with that, he walked out, leaving me shattered, alone, and still completely unheard. That night felt endless. I sat on the floor of my room, curled into myself, as if folding my body might protect my soul. Akram's words rang inside my chest like gunshots. Not only had he refused to believe me, he had made me the villain. The woman he had once adored now disgusted him. In his eyes, I was the one corrupting the peace of his family. And yet it wasn't my voice causing the cracks. It was Ijaz, the man who haunted the hallways with soft steps and loud stares. The man who had turned my home into a trap. In the days that followed, I tried my best to stay invisible. I woke early, completed my chores in silence, avoided eye contact with everyone. I became a shadow in my own house. My mother-in-law, always absorbed in her beauty salon, barely noticed the shift. But Ijaz noticed. Oh, he noticed everything. He stopped pretending. Now he followed me openly. He stood too close in the kitchen, brushed against me in the corridor, waited outside my room when he thought no one was watching. I couldn't tell if he enjoyed my fear or simply felt entitled to my body. Maybe both. One afternoon, while Akram was at work and my mother-in-law had left for the salon, Ijaz called out from the kitchen. His voice sounded urgent. I hesitated. Then, out of instinct or obligation, I went. He stood by the stove, holding a knife loosely in his hand, blood dripping from his palm. I gasped. What happened? I was slicing vegetables, he said casually. And the knife slipped. I grabbed a clean towel and the first aid kit, trying to focus. But even as I bandaged his hand, I felt his eyes on me, studying me as if I were something to be owned. You're really good at this, he said, watching my hands move. So soft. So gentle. You'd make an excellent wife. I already am a wife, I said, not looking at him. To your brother. He smiled. That's the tragedy, isn't it? I stood up abruptly. Enough, Ijaz. He didn't even flinch. You know what the real problem is? He said, his voice low. You should have accepted it from the start. I've always admired you. I would have treated you better than he ever could. But now you've made things difficult for both of us. I ran out of the kitchen without a word. Every wall in the house felt like it was whispering, watching, mocking. That night, I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling, asking myself the same question over and over. What do you do when your silence is seen as weakness, your voice dismissed as madness, and your body treated like a prize? I no longer feared Ijaz. I feared what I might become if this continued, and I feared what he might do next. It had been almost 2 weeks since Akram had last spoken to me properly. He no longer asked how I was. He no longer looked at me the same. He came home late, ate in silence, and either slept early or disappeared to the rooftop with a jazz. I no longer questioned his absence. I feared it. I feared what Ejaz might be pouring into his ears. And I was right to. One night, I was washing dishes after dinner while Akram went upstairs to get some air. Something about his silence made me uneasy. I hurried through the dishes and quietly followed him. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard voices, familiar, bitter, and heavy with deceit. "I don't know what I did wrong, Bhai," Ejaz was saying in a pained voice. "She hates me. She insults me all the time, calls me useless, lazy. I've been quiet, trying to respect her as your wife, but..." My breath caught. "She even said Rubina isn't good enough for me," he continued. "Just because Rubina doesn't come from money, doesn't have her beauty, she thinks she's better than everyone." I stood frozen. Akram sighed. "She never said anything directly, but lately, yes, she's changed. Always moody. Acting like she's too good for this house." "Exactly," Ejaz whispered. "She wants to separate you from all of us. One day she'll ask you to leave this house. And when that happens, you'll lose everything." My legs trembled. I couldn't move. "I just don't want us brothers to grow apart," Ejaz said, his voice breaking. Then came a sound that broke me. Akram placing his hand on his brother's back and saying, "You're my blood. She's just my responsibility." I felt something collapse inside me. I tiptoed back down the stairs, my heart in pieces. I didn't know which hurt more, the lies Ejaz had told or the fact that Akram had believed every word. And yet, I said nothing. The next morning, I acted normal. I served breakfast, cleaned the house, smiled at my mother-in-law. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I helped set the table while Ejaz sat right across from me, sipping his tea like nothing had happened. He looked straight into my eyes and smirked. He knew I had heard. And now, he also knew I would remain silent. He had found the perfect weapon, his brother's blind trust. That evening, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. Tired eyes, faded glow, and something else, a growing coldness. A quiet storm. I realized something vital that day. I could no longer cry my way through this. No one would save me. Not my husband, not my in-laws. If I wanted to survive, I had to stop waiting for someone to believe me. I had to endure. But I also had to watch, because something darker was coming. And I needed to be ready when it arrived. Akram's flight to Dubai was confirmed within days. He told me over dinner, casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "It's a great opportunity," he said, eyes on his plate. "I'll be earning in dirhams. It's time to think about the future." I forced a smile, though my insides turned cold. "You'll be going alone?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He looked up briefly, nodding. "Of course, you'll stay here, with Ami and Ejaz." My hand tightened around the spoon. "But how will I manage?" I whispered. "You won't be alone," he replied. My family is here. You'll be safe." Safe. The word echoed like mockery. He didn't look at me when he said it. And I didn't tell him that safety was the one thing I hadn't felt in this house for weeks. That night, when the lights were off and he lay beside me for the last time, I watched his face in the faint moonlight. I wanted to touch his arm, to plead, to tell him everything. But I didn't. He had already made up his mind. He had chosen his version of truth, and I had lost my place in it. 3 days later, Akram left. My mother-in-law cried and hugged him at the airport. Ejaz even pretended to get emotional, wiping his eyes while smirking at me from behind his hand. I stood in silence, watching the man I loved walk away, and I knew deep down he was leaving me to wolves. The first week without him was a nightmare I couldn't wake from. My mother-in-law spent her days at the beauty salon, returning home only late at night. I was left alone in the house, with a jazz, day after day. He no longer pretended. He hovered in the kitchen while I cooked. He waited outside the bathroom when I showered. He commented on the way I walked, the way I dressed, the scent I wore. There were no filters now, just a constant, suffocating presence. Once, while I was vacuuming, he placed a chair in front of me and stared, openly, boldly. "Don't mind me," he said. "I like watching art in motion." I said nothing. I couldn't afford to react anymore. The moment I showed discomfort, he turned it into a joke. If I pushed back too hard, he'd twist it against me. I became a ghost in my own body, a shell wrapped in silence. I tried staying in my room, but that too was no escape. He'd knock persistently, call me for meaningless tasks. Sometimes he'd even enter without warning. Every footstep outside my door felt like thunder. Every minute alone in the house felt like a countdown to something I couldn't name. And then it happened. One afternoon, exhausted from chores, I fell asleep on my bed. When I opened my eyes, the world was different, and I knew, even before I saw the signs, something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. I woke up to chaos, not the kind with noise, but the kind that wraps around your throat like a cold hand. The sunlight had dimmed. My body felt strange. My scarf was twisted around my neck, half hanging off the bed. The door, which I clearly remembered locking, was ajar. My heart sank. My clothes felt misplaced. The room looked disturbed, as if someone had been there, moved things, touched things. And then I knew. I called out, voice trembling, "Ijaz!" No answer. I staggered to the door and stepped into the hallway. My voice rose, calling again, but I already knew what I wouldn't find. When he finally appeared, he had that same disgusting smile on his face. "What happened?" he said mockingly. "Did you miss me?" My blood boiled. "Were you in my room?" He didn't deny it. He laughed. "You were sleeping so peacefully. I thought I'd make sure you were safe." I wanted to scream, cry, scratch his eyes out. But I knew he was waiting for that. He wanted me to lose control. Yet, "You're disgusting," I hissed. "You're a criminal." "Criminal?" He stepped closer. "I warned you. I told you we could have done this nicely. But you kept pushing me away. Now look." He leaned in, voice colder than death. "If you tell anyone, I'll deny everything. Who do you think they'll believe? The